Hi, I am Lolade, and welcome to the Perimenopause Playbook, where we empower women in peri and postmenopause to take control of their lives, starting with your home as ground zero for cognitive health. Through neuroscience-informed design, we create a toolkit to support your cognitive, emotional, and personal transformation, evolving with your needs. This is where you reignite your power and make things happen again, starting with the space you live in. Stick around. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Perimenopause Playbook. This is episode 17, and I'm really excited to bring this episode to you because it's the first of a new series of episodes, and we're kicking it off with an idea. We're going to explore the idea that I've been exploring and researching quite a bit, and it's on something that has really influenced and shifted how I view my own home. First, as a hypersensitive individual, and now as a hypersensitive individual who is navigating perimenopause. So over the next 10 episodes, we're going to explore the science and psychology of how our homes act as a neural extension and how it informs our habits, our moods, and our cognitive function. Now, this is not just an abstract idea. It's going to be grounded in neuroscience and environmental psychology. So before we start, I'd like to do a quick plug for the Reinvention program, my coaching program. If you've been listening, the doors are still open, and based on feedback from my coach, we're going to keep the Reinvention Essentials open all year long because there's no need to work on a one-on-one basis. So if you're interested in a self-paced coaching program, the Reinvention Essentials remains open, but the doors to the Reinvention Mastery closes in a couple of days. So if you haven't already signed up, now is your chance to sign up to work with me to reinvent your space to support you in perimenopause and postmenopause. Now, that being said, let's get into the episode. So now, this idea of the home as a neural extension is not an abstract idea, like I said earlier. We're going to provide you with research to support all of our claims. For decades, we have believed that the brain was a fixed thing. It's been wired by our childhood experiences, and it's largely unchangeable. But neuroscience has flipped that script. Our brains are constantly being reshaped and rewired by our experiences. And our home environments, and environments in general, but for the purpose of this episode, because I'm focused on the home environments, our home environments are a powerful ongoing source of that experience. The space around you right now is actively influencing your brain function. It is influencing your stress levels. It's influencing your focus and your emotional regulation. And this is especially relevant during perimenopause, a period of immense neurological transition. So today we're going to explore why, and we're going to explore how intentional design choices can support our cognitive and emotional resilience. Now, let's talk about the science and the psychology before we talk about interior design strategies that we can use right now, because the what and the how is really important in order to influence the what and the why is super important in order to understand the process of that we're going to discuss. So let's start with neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself throughout life. And it plays a key role in the way we interact with our surroundings. And there are two major ways that this process happens. The first is synaptic plasticity. Now, this process involves neural pathways being strengthened or weakened based on repeated use. A home environment that promotes calm and order has the potential to reinforce pathways linked to focus and relaxation. On the other hand, overstimulating spaces can reinforce stress-related circuits. And Studies such as Mosconi and others demonstrate that repeated sensory input can drive neural reorganization, which supports the idea that environmental adjustments have lasting cognitive effects. Now, the second is an experience-dependent plasticity. And this is where our brains don't just passively receive information from the world around it. It actively constructs a reality based on lived experience. And what this means is that your home is continuously shaping and reshaping neural pathways. It's influencing how we feel and how we behave within our home environment. And to support this, I'm going to pop all the research, all the relevant research in the show notes, so I don't bore you with all of the research. So the two are synaptic plasticity and experience-dependent plasticity. Now consider how environments affected the different environments we expose ourselves to. A well-lit, organized space can promote clarity and focus. Harsh overhead lighting, clutter, excessive noises can increase your cognitive load, which then makes tasks feel a lot more mentally draining. The home then, as you can already see, is not just a backdrop in our lives. It's not a space that we just exist in. It is such a rich, stimulus triggering environment which continuously influences our mental states. Now let us look at the psychology. Our environment does more than shape our cognition. It also influences our sense of self. And this is where environmental psychology, specifically the concept of place identity, comes in. And place identity refers to the way our environments contribute to an individual's sense of self and belonging. And it suggests that the spaces we inhabit shape our personal and cultural identity, which then affects how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with the world around us. More research on that in the show notes. Now, another is on the subject of psychology is our homes as an emotional anchor, right? A home that aligns with our sensory and emotional needs fosters a sense of security and self-expression, while on the other hand, an environment that feels chaotic or unsupportive can potentially erode our sense of stability and exacerbate stress levels. Now, the third psychology research turned up environmental triggers and its effect on emotional regulation. Now, every object in our spaces, color choices, texture choices, and even our spatial arrangements in our home environments, they all carry psychological weight. They influence our mood, they influence our emotional regulation. And studies suggest that minimalist, well-organized spaces can promote a sense of calm, and cluttered environments can contribute to anxiety and overwhelm. Now, I want to highlight here that minimalism, in this sense, is not a home that's devoid of character or personality, or is just clean lines and white walls and not much else. Minimalism in this context is stripping away all of the unnecessary things, all of the elements that are emotionally triggering to us, all of the objects and things in our spaces that don't serve our highest good, our greatest good, and then reintroducing intentionally objects and elements and textures and colors and anything that you identify with that brings a sense of identity to you, that improves your cognitive function. That's my definition of minimalism. Choosing the things that you include in your spaces with intention, where every object, everything around you has meaning, has a function, is beautiful, but it's at the same time, it's supporting your cognitive health. not just something that we pick up here and there and toss together, creating visual noise in our spaces. So I hope I've been able to differentiate what I mean by decluttering and minimalizing your space, if that's a word, to mainstream ideas surrounding minimalism. They're very different. If at the end of the day you're the sort of person who leans towards clean lines and pure spaces, like think white walls or beige walls or what have you, then that's your jam. But if you're not the type of person, minimalism doesn't look like that for you. Okay? So I just wanted to clarify that, because I've gotten quite a few people talking back and saying they're not into minimalism, so you're not talking to me. This is what I mean by minimalism. Anyway, let's carry on. So what this means, these psychological concepts of place identity, home as an emotional anchor, and environmental triggers and how they affect emotional regulation. What they mean is that curating our homes with intention, like I mentioned earlier, is not just about aesthetic qualities. It's about creating an environment that actively supports our psychological and our emotional resilience. So why is this particularly crucial for women in peri and postmenopause? The reason for this is that hormonal fluctuations are profoundly impacting key neurochemical systems in the brain. And there are three key processes at play here. The first is estrogen and the prefrontal cortex. Estrogen supports the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that governs executive function like decision making, working memory, and planning. And as levels fluctuate, brain fog, decision fatigue, and forgetfulness can become more pronounced. There's research on the mechanisms in the show notes. The second process is progesterone and the GABAergic system. So progesterone has calming effects via the GABAergic system. And as this declines, progesterone, sensory sensitivity and anxiety levels can increase, which then makes environmental stressors more impactful. For instance, while I've been sensitive to loud noises, I find that tiny little intrusions grate on my nerves like nothing you know. I made a post about this a while back, and I got so much response from my fellow perimenopausal ladies who were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe just how annoying small, previously tolerable sounds all of a sudden become intolerable." And that's happening because progesterone levels are declining and our sensory sensitivity is increasing. But we can, like we would discuss, like we'll run through later on in the episode, we can gain agency over this and support this transition with our home environments. So the third process is sensory processing changes. So it's not so much a process, but it's just sort of explaining how our sensory processing mechanisms change. So estrogen, like what we mentioned earlier, affects the prefrontal cortex, but it also affects sensory gating. And this is a sensory gating that helps to filter out irrelevant stimuli. So lower levels leads to sensory overload. Overhead lighting. If you could tolerate overhead lighting before, you would start to notice that things you used to tolerate are harder to tolerate because of declining hormones in our system. And so this points a finger to the fact that estrogen and progesterone work in synergy to buffer us against stress. And estrogen is really interesting because it does so much for our bodies, and that's why we have so many estrogen receptors all over the brain, all over the body. So estrogen, like you would have noticed now, not only governs executive function, but it also helps to filter out irrelevant stimuli. So yeah, research on that also is in the show notes if you're interested in learning more. So when you pair these changes, this hormonal fluctuations and the changes that come with them, you pair that with with an environment that does not support you, it creates a compounding effect, which then makes cognitive and emotional regulation more challenging than it needs to be. It is really important to underline here the significance of our environments in shaping our neurobiological systems, because these environments function as catalysts. They provide our brains with information that influence our behaviors, our cognitive function, our emotional regulation, and decision-making abilities. And more importantly, it is crucial to recognize that we can take control of these catalysts and use them with intention to achieve the outcomes we desire for ourselves. Now, here is the empowering shift. When we understand the how and the why, this gives us the power to implement solutions, because awareness is the first step, and it's key to then starting to think about, okay, so I know how and why this is happening, and that gives me an in into how we can solve the problem, right? So understanding this means we can intentionally design our homes to support our brains during this transition period. So in that vein, I'm going to provide you with concrete, actionable steps that directly addresses the mechanisms we have discussed above. The first strategy is to optimize sensory input. So the first thing to do is to adjust your lighting. I've talked about lighting so many times, and it bears talking about all over again, because it all circles back to just the major things. There are other underlying things that we can do, but the major thing, this is a major thing, and it's the lighting. It's not just the artificial lighting, it's exposure to natural lighting, getting natural sunlight into the eyes, early morning sunlight, not noon sunlight, because that can be damaging to your rods and cones. So adjust your lighting to optimize the sensory input. Use warm indirect light sources to reduce harsh overhead glare. For instance, you can use bulbs around the 2700 Kelvin range to support your circadian rhythms if you have access to natural sunlight, like in the winter, or if you live in an environment like, say, the North Pole, where there's not a lot of sunlight. So yeah, there's that. And then also introduce into your space soft textures like rugs and window treatments and upholstered furniture. And this helps to absorb sound, and they create a comforting atmosphere. And also really important is to reduce noise pollution. So if, like me, external noises, you find them disruptive and they just grate on your nerves, consider introducing or using thick curtains or soundproof panels or acoustic curtains. Or you can use a white noise machine or use subliminal sounds to mask intrusive noise. Like I use when I need to work, or most times of the day, during the day, especially now that there is a lot of construction work going on next door. They're building a massive housing development. And during the week, in the middle of the day, I can hear the sound. Sometimes it's super loud and sometimes it's not so loud because I've got double glazing. But once my windows are open, all bets are off. So my windows are usually closed, but some noise still filters in, and sometimes it can be more disruptive than other times. So I play these bird songs, and it's so calming and it masks all of the noise intrusion. So that is a strategy that I use personally. And if it works for you, then yeah, it doesn't have to be birds. It could be anything. It could be rain. It could be anything. Your choice. something that tickles your fancy. So now that's the first strategy, optimizing sensory input. The second is to create cognitive and emotional anchors. So the first strategy under this creating cognitive and emotional anchors is to designate functional zones for yourself. So establish dedicated areas for relaxation or focus or creativity. So if you work from home, have a dedicated space where you know that once you are sat down, this is for work. You're not doing anything else there. It's strictly for work. So your brain understands that once you're sat there, it's recalibrating, it's calibrating for work. And then when you're ready to relax, you have it could be the same space. It's just visual anchors in your space that informs your brain that this space is for this function, that space is for that function. Yeah. So you have these dedicated areas in your space, regardless of the size of your house. If you live in a studio apartment, it's totally possible. If you live in a bigger house, functional zones, you can visually delineate these spaces with walls or separating panels or what have you, right? But the key thing is to establish dedicated areas for each function that you need: relaxation, focus, creativity, collaboration. The list is endless. And keep the spaces visually distinct in order to support cognitive associations. Like I mentioned earlier, your brain needs to understand that these zones are for specific tasks or specific events. And so it's better able to task switch without the cognitive overload. And also use familiar objects. So display personal items like your favorite artwork, family photos, or photos of places you love to visit, or any meaningful object that reinforces a sense of identity and stability in your space. And a third thing is to incorporate natural elements like indoor plants, like nature, natural textures like wood, stone, concrete, and also nature-inspired colors. These have been shown to reduce stress and enhance well-being. A third strategy is to conduct a sensory and psychological audit. Now, this is really important. This should have been number one, actually, because before you start to introduce things into your space, you need to conduct a sensory and psychological audit. So we worked on this backwards. So walk through your home and identify stressors. It could be anything. Just do an audit and have a notepad with you and make notes. Spend a little time in each space and really pay attention to how you feel. Case in point, if say for instance, your workspace, you find that the clutter on your desk or the way your desk is arranged or located within the space is a little unnerving for you, or it's not optimal, make that note down. If you walk into a space and you find that the noise intrusion bothers you and prevents you from carrying out the activity that you desire in that space, make a note of that as well. But start small. Declutter one key area first, because our brain also compartmentalizes these activities. If you put too much on your brain at once, that leads to decision fatigue, and you're going to be sabotaging what you're trying to do. So start small. Declutter one area, replace an overwhelming sensory element with something that's sensorily supportive to you, or introduce one thing at a time, or two things at a time, or three things at a time, but start small, right? Don't overwhelm yourself. We need to move through reinventing our spaces with intention, and the intention takes time. If you rush through it, you're most likely going to overwhelm yourself. And then regularly reassess your space, because our needs are evolving. If you're in perimenopause, you would notice that there's always an add-on as you're navigating perimenopause and things are starting to shift. You're going to be noticing that your needs are evolving, your lights are changing, your sense of smell is changing, things are just shifting. So, and that's why it's important to start small. So you're not doing it all at one go, and then you find that a week later, your needs have evolved, So as your needs evolve, continue adjusting your space to ensure that it remains supportive to you. So this week, I'm going to give you an assignment. Your practical step is to conduct that sensory audit that we mentioned earlier. Just pick one space at a time. Become a sensory detective in your own space because no one else knows you better than you. Identify those top 3 sensory stressors and then note them down and then work on how you can replace that sensory stressor with a less sensory stressor. We explored this deeper in the reinvention program. And if you're interested in working with a structured program, the reinvention program is totally for you. The doors are still open. So head on over to the website. The link is in the show notes as well, and you can get started today. So yeah, think of it this way. Your home right now, your home is a living, breathing reflection of your brain's current state. But it does not have to be a fixed reflection. You have the power to reprogram that space. You have the power to use design intentionally to rewire and reprogram your space in order to rewire and reprogram your brain. And in doing so, you're rewiring your own cognitive and emotional landscape. So in the next episode, that's in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the fascinating intersection of habit formation and how that influences the design of our home environments. We're going to explore how to use spatial cues to break free from unwanted routines and then intentionally build new, healthier habits, which is especially relevant as we navigate the shifting landscapes of perimenopause. And until then, be well, look at your home with new, neuroscientifically informed eyes. You hold the power to design not just a house, but a brain-supportive haven. See you next time.